Hello and welcome to Neuromentoring. We're so glad you can join us.
I'm Lucy.
I'm Brian.
Together, we explore what mentoring is in these neurodiverse spaces we call universities. Today's topic is holisticity of mentoring.
Holisticity. That whole idea that mentoring is holistic. It maybe covers everything, but we still need to kind of define what everything is. A lot of this idea of holisticity comes back to when mentoring started. I reckon about 2008, 2009, maybe a little bit before then. There's a couple of papers out. It was supporting students on the autistic spectrum student mentor guidelines by the National Autistic Society. That came out 2010, 2011. And that had this whole idea of that we were there to remove barriers to learning. Lucy, what's a barrier to learning?
Another ambiguous term to define.
Isn't it?
There's no
Yes.
there's no set definition, but in literal terms, it's looking at the student as a whole and not considering any academic considerations. It's also looking at the student, who they are, their emotional well-being, their mental well-being, their history, their preferences, their environment. The holistic, in my mind, holistic is like a globe, and the person is in the middle of it. And you're looking at all aspects of, characteristics, actually is the word, characteristics. And removing barriers isn't a start to end process. There'll be peaks and troughs throughout, but it's about empowering the student with the opportunity to address some of the barriers to learning rather than removing them.
I'm loving your globe model of this, that this big circle, this sphere that goes around the student. But actually, life sometimes gets in the way of being a student. It's not, we need to encourage that life to flourish, to be the best student. With this holisticity, I said it right first time. I'm really proud of myself.
Yes, well done. 10 out of 10.
Where does it start? Where does it end? What goes around it?
I think that's where the grey area comes. Red flags. And I think it's careful application of boundaries. I think it's also considering and being mindful as the person mentoring, as well as the well-being and and the well-being of the mentee, and actually considering how important it is for the mentor to also apply the same advice, practice, care, consideration, but within sort of a non-rigid but much more flexible notion of boundaries. What do you think?
It's where, I'm never quite happy with the word boundary. Sometimes I go to the word ethics. There is stuff about what is right and what is wrong. Mentors who abuse their position of power and end up sleeping with a mentee, they're scum. They shouldn't be allowed to practice. But that is one of the it's not even a rule. It's just that somebody has broken the trust given to them. And that's why if you start couching it in an ethical term, what we expect from our mentors is for them to be ethical creatures so that they can actually create agency, they can do the right thing at the right time, rather than having maybe a list of rules. Do we want a legal mentor? It does, having those rules of things, but for an individual, it might make their life a little bit easier. I will do this, I won't do this, I will do this, I won't do this. It means you have to, if that's your mode of preference, you have to think things through to start with. So things like you have a student from abroad who's stuck over Christmas in a university. I know of lecturers and tutors who sometimes scoop those students up and give them a Christmas meal because it's the thoroughly decent and good thing to do. Does that lecturer, does that mentor run through in their head, actually, how do I keep myself safe? How do I make sure that there's nothing untoward happening? All those kind of things. They do that because it's ethical, but they're also scooping up someone for a little bit of joy because it's the right thing to do. It's ethics. If you're not good at ethics, go for legal. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. But I was just thinking about when you was talking there, I think it's a combination of ethics, professionalism, but actually care. Because I think if you don't build that rapport and that trust with your mentor, you're letting themselves and yourself down, and you're not the right fit for that student. That's a separate phenomenon. Perhaps we'll go into on another podcast about, are you the right fit? But I think care is definitely an element here, and it could potentially be the care that where the boundaries lines are blurred or perhaps flex a little.
Would I be right in saying then that we might be professionals of care, and our professionalism has to be slightly different from the professionalism of a teacher, the professionalism of a doctor, the professionalism of a police officer, woman, man. I can never get that one right. Where would it? How would you describe this professionalism of the mentor?
Well, both of us, having come from a teaching background, know that there are very strong frameworks, rules to follow. That's how education works, certainly here in the UK. But one of the reasons that I became a mentor was that I loved the pastoral, that aha moment. And as time went on, different things happened, and I felt myself not being able to provide that for students, which, whilst this isn't an educational role, have you ever come across noddings, care and education?
No, tell me more.
So this is going to make me really scratch my brain here. So this is thinking back when I was on my master's program, and we were looking at the philosophy of education. Now she's a progressive. Her ideology is quite progressive, but talks about how education has become quite machine-like, but how the lack of care and education is the difference between someone succeeding or someone thriving. And actually, if you look at the mentoring, the pastoral parts in a mainstream education or school setting, unfortunately, over the previous couple of years, or maybe in a decade or so, even when I was at school, pastoral, there was somebody who was there for pastoral support through both primary and secondary. And then looking to my professional career, the teacher takes on that role, but it's still in a very rigid framework structure in a very set way. Whereas the mentoring doesn't have that framework, that structure necessarily, that's so rigid. It's fluid and flexible.
I remember being taught during my teacher training, which last century, that sometimes the mode of care you could show little year nines was maybe you could pat them 3 times on the rucksack on the way out. 1, 2, 3. And that's almost as much of the pastoral care that you get, rather than the job that we have, which is we sometimes become engaged in this mentoring relationship with our students where we will sit down with them in their rough times. But actually, there will be times of despair where we will be sitting alongside, usually sipping a cup of tea or coffee, just shoulder to shoulder, talking about really, really tough stuff. The times where they've been disenfranchised, the times where they've been rejected, the times where they found the hatred of others upon them, and that they've seen that in so much more detail. And that is more than just patting 3 times on the rucksack and sending them on their way. So there has to be a different professionalism which allows for this authentic relationship to blossom and bloom. And it's how we manage that, how we do that right. I come back to again that we have to do that right because we are ethical creatures, and we have to work on our own ethics, and we don't step across the lines that we have drawn ourselves, but we have to create those lines in real time.
Yeah.
It's a tough job. It's a brilliant job, but it's a tough job at times, isn't it?
Yeah,
So,
you never, sorry, carry on.
No, tell me.
I was just going to say that you just never know. You might see a student every week, every other week, twice a week. Between sessions, something could happen that changes their world. And no 2 sessions are ever the same, from my experience.
Indeed. And it means that if we are a little bit too obsessed with our own boundaries, it stops that happening. If you know, we start down at the beginning of every session, today we're going to talk about this, this, and this. We're going to talk about
Yeah.
your schoolwork and your university work and nothing else. You just need to know your grades and whether you can spell the word. If that's all your boundary, if that every single time it's hammering in, this is what my boundary is, then you will not get those trusting relationships where the big pains of being a student, of studenthood, of I'm going to go sociologist here, of your student habitus, but those not just
Yeah.
habits, but those beings that create you who you are in that moment for those wonderful 3-4 years or more, some of us, of university. It's if we're obsessed about boundaries as mentors, we will get in the way of our own job. So we need
Yeah.
to obsess about our ethics instead. And then the boundaries then grow so that we get these authentic relationships. Lucy, authentic relationships. Why? Why does this work as mentors?
Authentic relationships. So from my experience, a lot of my students have said things like, oh, school have let me down, or I'm late diagnosed, or people in my home life, you know, don't accept who I am, don't accept my condition, don't understand. For that student, you may be the first person that accepts them for who they are, appreciates who they are. You accept them in such a way that you scaffold them until they're free to do it themselves. And that, again, that's a separate process. But ultimately, most neurodivergent students are so attuned to when it could go wrong socially that I think the authentic relationship needs to occur holistically in many different areas. Will I say that every mentor is going to be great for every student that's assigned to them? No. But that's where, you know, actually, I'm not going to be able to help this student, but do you know what? I'm going to signpost them or hand them back, you know, to find and give some advice on where I think that they have better support. But again, that's not a rigid set of boundaries, because I think if you think that way, you're setting boundaries on yourself in terms of being able to grow as a mentor. I think the learning process is consistent, and you've got to be consistent, and you've got to have your toe dipped in CPD in order to be able to show up for the student in an authentic way. And I think once you've established that bond, the work really starts, is my view on it.
And if it's an authentic bond, you are being you as well as letting them be them. And if you're being you
Absolutely.
and you say, actually, I don't know. And there's the humility of mentoring. We should do a whole session on the humility of mentoring. That'd be
Yes.
brilliant. That's just, I like that one. If we're being humble and actually saying, I know you and I know me, and I can't help you right now, that is a proper relationship. And it is one of those
Yeah.
ones that perhaps our students that come to us have been stolen. Those are the kind of things that are stolen from them because people
Yeah.
are being, maybe by just being ourselves and not mean. I think those go together. We are allowing these little spaces backstage because that's the joy of mentoring. We're not doing this on the high street. We're not doing this in, well, say we don't do it in pubs and clubs and bars of students, but some of us that do. Well, I don't know. It's, it's not that I go clubbing with students. I'm too old for that kind of stuff. I feel like clubbing with Santa Claus. But actually, going to those spaces is incredible. And we are backstage. So we create these spaces of trust. But also we
Yeah.
make sure that's not one of the boundaries that we set ourselves with.
Yes.
Lucy, have you ever gone on big long walks with students?
No, I
Oh,
haven't.
it's my favorite things is sometimes we're talking about a really big thing when we're sort of sat on our chairs in usually a beige covered room in the bowels of a university where it smells slightly of gone off heating. Actually going, no, this is a big one. Let's walk and talk. And so we would head out and we'd go around it. Very, very lucky to have a great big pub near where I used to work. And as we would walk, particularly maybe I just think for crisp water days, just wandering along and talking about the world. And sometimes our position in it and how things weren't right. And gave us that space where we could be more ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I commend that to you. Just big long walks. Don't do it on rainy days. Don't do it when it's a sensory overload. Don't get sunburned, etc., etc. But
No.
that's part of knowing yourself,
No.
a student, and being ethical. But
And
yeah.
I also think that, like you say, with that authentic relationship, neurodivergent brains are very, sometimes the best ideas come when you're doing something tactile. That could be on a walk, that could be riding a bike, it could be, I don't know, swimming, etc. I know for me, swimming is a great space for me to pop with ideas. So I think that's a really nice way, but you're forming a trusting environment, a trusting bond that's in a neutral environment. And I think, like you say, it's not within four walls, and actually it creates this beautiful space for expression.
And actually, when you're inside the four walls, so my old mentoring room, I used to have, not Settlers of Catan, the one with all the squares that you put Carcassonne. There we go.
Okay.
The little board game Carcassonne, it was under there. There was also a pack of Magic the Gathering cards. And actually, occasionally students would come in a bit stressed, more actually sometimes really relaxed, and we would crack out the games so that we could do this parallel play while talking about big things. I had a couple of little Lego sets in there as well, and sometimes just taking it back from the normative expectation of, a bearded old man on a couch and a little bit of therapy. No, it's not that.
No.
It's about doing these things together that allows us to talk. And I couldn't have done that if I was obsessing about boundaries.
Yeah, it's similarly actually, Brian. It's come at a good time. I've got, obviously, it's another academic year. I've got new students, and the first question is, what is mentoring?
Yeah.
I might put it to students, it's whatever you want it to be. You know, sometimes that might be you talking to me about something you found out about. It might be you talking over an idea you've had for something you've learned. It might be you want to work on X, Y, and Z things. How do I do it? Where do I go? And I put it to students, there's never going to be a plan. It's whatever you bring to the session, and we'll go through things as they come up. But I do...
Lucy, to just pull you on with that a little bit.
Yeah.
If you have a student who is desperate for a little bit of clarity, or just feeling that they've come to university, everything's in flux, and suddenly this mentor is just going, yeah, whatever. How do you focus it in for that particular student?
I would ask the student, usually during the initial sessions, how they would like it to be. And I always ask, okay, what things work well for you? What things don't work well for you? What are your interests? I try and in the very first session, before I even say, answer the question, what is mentoring, I find as much as I can in the first couple of sessions about the student, and then I'll adapt a little bit. So I have some students that say, oh, can we do this? Can we do this in our next session? I said, of course we can, I'll write it down. Some students will remember that's what they do. Some students don't think, oh, well, actually, it might be a good idea. Or some students might say, oh, can we talk about something else? And that's fine. But I never, in an education sense, I think, right, with this student, I've got a plan to do this during this hour. It's just not modular. It's not.
One of the things you mentioned there is you find out their interests. It's one of those things with students I've been quite open about is tell me about the things that are brilliant.
Yeah.
There is, unfortunately, shall we call it a social barrier against info dumping. I love a good info dump. People can info dump to me for hours. They're just bloody fascinating. And actually having someone in your life where you can do that info dump in a safe and constructive way, it allows the rest of your life to get up. So if you're a mentor if you're a mentor listening to this, if you're a mentee listening to this, actually the joy of special interest is one of those things that I think sets us aside from regular mentoring and gives us a sort of special and privileged place where we can find brilliant stuff about brilliant things. I now love dinosaurs, dinosaur extinction events, parasitic wasps, cosplay, all the comic One Piece, since it's just become live action as well. Absolutely amazing. I love these interests. I spent best part of 7-8 days binge watching all the Disney princess movies just so that I knew what Disney princesses really were, because they're brilliant. That they give form and function to life. These are amazing things that have enriched my life as
Yeah.
well as providing a key to understand and process what's going on around my mentees' lives.
Yeah, and I think that's an important component. If there was a recipe to mentoring, I think you've got to have genuine interest in what excites their world. For example, I've had a student who has shown me the world of fan fiction. I didn't necessarily know that there was this world. I had another student that showed me the world of Discord. Another student, similarly actually, that would draw me dinosaurs every week, and I just loved it. I just loved all the information that I could absorb.
I've been
And
taught how
without,
to draw a dinosaur, and you know, sometimes after courses they give you this, please could you put your feedback form. I've always hated giving feedback after courses, so I now draw a picture of a dinosaur and submit it.
that's so cool.
I now apologize to all the courses that I've been on for the last year or so who've just got little T-Rexes just go, oh, I liked your course.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So that love of the interest as part of an authentic relationship. And this is maybe the thing to add is you can't have a really good appreciation of a good special interest.
No.
You've got to be the kind of person that's just interested in stuff because things are brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that comes back to that's not ethics. That's about finding things that are beneficial to yourself, beneficial to the relationship, but also making sure that the things that might be a hindrance, like not being able to talk about special interest, gets removed.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think something just to sprinkle that with is you have to remember as a mentor, you're human. I mean, we're brilliant humans. And sometimes we might not have capacity. And maybe we shouldn't be faking it when we don't have capacity. Be actually quite open about that.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. Absolutely.
It does mean if we are open with about all this stuff, we can put to one side the potential of being interpreted as rejecting someone. If we are being holistic, if we are being our wonderful, interested selves, then if we're having a rough day, we say, I'm having a rough day. If you see Brian not sparkling, then that's actually nothing to do with you because XYZ is going on in my life. That's not getting rid of a boundary. That's making sure that somebody who has been rejected does not feel rejected again.
Yeah.
It's belonging. I know some some research doesn't say that, rejection sensitive dysphoria is a thing in the ADHD community. I'm not sure I believe them.
No, it is definitely a thing.
Just for those of you who are out there, Lucy, could you reckon you could do a good definition of rejection sensitive dysphoria?
So rejection sensitive dysphoria is experienced with people who have traumatic backgrounds, people that have neurodivergence and or both, or experience mental health difficulties. And rejection sensitive dysphoria is how the brain interprets information as criticism to who you are at the core. It could be somebody making an ambiguous statement, for example, I don't like a certain brand of clothing. You could somebody that experiences rejection sensitive dysphoria could read into that situation if they're wearing that brand that you're attacking me. It's any potential criticism can be interpreted in many different ways, but I think to give a summary, that probably you feel rejection by things that in the neurotypical world wouldn't be considered rejection.
A lifetime of criticism makes you super aware that it might be going on, even if it might not be.
Yes.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Around that way. You got that.
And because of that, being a mentor means we have to make sure because we need to have the tough conversations. We need to be able to say things like, you haven't handed in an essay all year. Do you really want to be a student? Those big things. Where actually, how do you say that and not make it feel like you're rejecting that student from being a student? It's part of the mastery of our craft.
Yes, absolutely.
think we can only do that because we built these trusting relationships first. Yeah, I'm in a lovely position. I was a mentor for about 11, 12 years. Now, it's been quite some time. And yet some of the students that I first know a decade or so ago still occasionally text me to tell me they've got a new job, to tell me they're getting married, to inform me of family changes and all that kind of stuff. And it really is an absolute pleasure, 10
Yeah.
years after to have these events relayed to me because they still trust me. They want me to know. And that's a
Yeah.
brilliant thing. Now, it does mean the older I get, the more texts I have to juggle every week or so, but actually it's worth it. It really is. Just making sure that well, they're not young people anymore. These older people are still leading fabulous lives. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. If that initial foundation isn't there, there's nothing to support the infrastructure that is mentoring.
Getting it right there at the beginning.
Yeah.
So, should we have a quick little, how do we do this in the first few sessions that we meet with a student? How do we make ourselves be these people of trust? How do we make sure that we talk about or give the opportunity to talk about holisticity? I've got some examples.
Oh, far away, Brian. I'm just thinking.
Okay. So one of I did research with lots of mentors all across the UK, and there was a lovely story of a student who really wanted to be involved in experiment. The experiment was just being done for them at the front, or maybe it was online, and they couldn't do it themselves. And it was all about owl pellets. And so the mentor and the mentee worked out where to source owl pellets, the things that owls throw up when they've been eating. Yeah. So that the student themselves could do this little sort of experiment and tease apart the owl pellet. It's a fantastic story of actually that's not within the usual remit of, yes, let's talk about well-being. That was actually, there's a barrier to learning, the fact that it's remote, the fact that you can't do a hands-on thing itself. How do we sort that? How do we look around to find, I think it was an owl sanctuary or something nearby, where we can find these little balls of owl vomit and source them? And then it would also build community so that the student would know where the owl sanctuary was, yeah, it was expanding things. It was a lovely bit of master mentoring that went on that encapsulated the holisticity, the holistic nature of mentoring.
No, I think that's a brilliant example. I don't necessarily
Wouldn't
have
do it
an
in your first
example.
week though. Let's find owl vomit.
I think to round it up nicely, I think you've got to meet the student at their level. You've got to want to be in, you've got to have inside you the drive to want to know all about the student, what their world is like, how to help them. Well, in the first session, not necessarily if you're just getting to know them. Some students may know the things that they find difficult to navigate, other students may not, depending on their presentation and a number of other factors. But I think the example you gave was a really illustrative way of the mentoring process, and I quite like that as an example in terms of giving an example of holisticity. Okay.
It was lovely just to have an insight into so many other mentors' lives and to find out that I'm not the only mentor that goes for big long walks with. There's actually quite a few of us out there that find the physical movement with our students actually a really good way of talking about all potential things. Actually, my master's study years and years ago, I was looking across the reports that I was, so back then I was having about 30 students a week. And I took all the themes over a year of the things that we talked about to try and map out what holisticity was. Interesting. It's a gloomy subject, but I'll bring it up. Most students at some point during their university career will experience the death of someone nearby. Sadly, sometimes this is a fellow student. Quite often, it's a grandparent who will pass during their student years. It's something about being 18, 19 and the sort of changes in families. Quite often it's a pet, particularly if you have, you've gone off to university, you've left your lovely pets behind. Pets aren't immortal, and 3 years is a long time for a pet.
Yeah.
In fact, it's twice the lifespan of a hamster. Oh, seriously, the only point to keep hamsters is to teach children about mortality. There's no other reason to have them. And those big things about death become part of our discussions in mentoring because they can be barriers to learn. When you are grieving
Absolutely.
and you've got no one to talk about your grief, big griefs and small griefs, then actually, we need those kind of people. So there has to be space in these trusting relationships. There were times and again, this research was done 5-6 years ago now, to talk about relationships. Students will get into relationships with other students. And sometimes having a wise figure to talk about and say, actually, I'm not sure this relationship is working out. How do I dump someone? Oh,
Yeah.
that's a big conversation. Or
That is very precise.
I've just been dumped and my heart is broken. Actually, those are big things to sit alongside someone and talk about, because those really, both of them really do get in the way of learning. There's, you can't learn when you're properly brokenhearted. You need to be able to think that through and have someone just to say, that sucks. Not that it's going to be all right.
No, definitely. And I think, again, that's another example of holisticity. You're seeing the student for who they are, you accept them for who you are, and you open up that safe place, however that looks, remotely, in person, on the move. You open up that safe place that perhaps they've never even had or experienced before. I think it's a nice example to give.
It's also potentially it's something that I wouldn't keep full notes of. So as mentors, we quite often keep our little notes as we go, just to remind ourselves of conversations. But actually, if a student is finding their own sexuality, we may have those conversations, but we will say, look, if you go, if there's coercion involved, I really don't, I will have to pass that one up. We make sure that we put in a note to ourselves that we can go back to, but also we don't want to disclose that to everybody who might have eyes on the note. So there is that fine line that we do. It is a good example of holisticity. It is one of those things that gives us that wider remit.
Absolutely.
So today, we've talked about holisticity. We've talked about holistic support being support across domains, across the campus, across the university. We've talked a little bit about this whole idea about removing barriers to learning. I think I went on a bit about ethics.
Rejection sensitivity.
That was a brilliant one. Clarity. Oh, the professionalism of care that might look different from just being a bureaucrat. I may have harped on about not to push, to have boundaries, but not to talk too much about them, because they can stop this trusting relationship. The disconnect that can go on. We need to do one at some point about the double empathy problem and how.
I think that's a whole podcast on itself there, Brian.
So, that's a whole series of podcasts by itself. and how boundaries might be interpreted in different ways, and how that comes together.
Absolutely.
I will say that the ultimate goal, if you're going to be a super mentor, is to know your own changing boundaries. It is a flexible feast. And some examples around there. Lucy, I think that's covered almost everything we want. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you, Brian.
If you have questions, we would love to hear them at neuromentoringpodcast@gmail.com.
So just to reiterate, that's neuromentoringpodcast@gmail.com. This has been Neuromentoring. Continue being brilliant.